Hey guys, this is my first attempt at doing this. I'm gonna see if it works the way I'm intending it to work. Looks like it is. Let me close that out so we don't get feedback. So I'm gonna start doing these creator content pieces for the Patreon, and they're basically, I'm planning on keeping most of this free initially, but it also may over time become that this stuff is lumped into the pay stuff as it's kind of put in the archive. So the first thing I wrote, if you didn't see, I kind of wrote about what inspired me to get into comics and finding that inspiration to get you to sit down in front of the computer and write, or create or make art, or it doesn't even have to be comics, just to get yourself inspired to break out of that habit of not creating. So I know not everybody comes into comics from the same background, and some people are just in it to write fun stories, and they're doing it outside of what their regular day job is. For me personally, I was coming from a place where I needed to create something. Like my mind, I constantly had to be creating. I was working in film production in the Chicago area for 8 or 9 years, and I, through that experience, I found that that just wasn't the right outlet for me. I wasn't inspired by it anymore. It just became a burden, and instead of working the crappy 9 to 5 job and trying to push through creatively on a medium that I wasn't happy with anymore, I decided to look for another way to do it. Decided I wanted to write, and my wife surprised me with some tickets to C2E2 that year, and I saw a panel that there was people talking about restarting their careers, a rebirth in a different medium, a different field than they ever had worked after working for a long period of time in other fields. And that inspired me to kind of take the leap into comics, because I had these stories in my head and I knew I was never going to be able to make them into independent films, especially because I just didn't have the heart to go after it anymore after producing stuff. So I started writing. I went home. I was inspired by these people's stories about the rebirth, and I decided to go home and write some scripts. And I wrote 3 different issue ones. One was something I've been working on with my brother for a long time, which is still kind of on the back burner, mainly because it's just a daunting fantasy idea. And then Alter Life issue 1 and Zed issue 1 were the other 2, which have been developed. And Alter Life is complete. Zed is ongoing. I will be coming back to that eventually at this point. But Alter Life was really the story that came from me feeling trapped in the dead end job that I was in, the 9 to 5 that seemed to be going nowhere. And I was trapped. I was doing data entry for 8 years, most of it from home work, not really being out among people. And it was basically just wearing me down. So I decided I'm going to write a script. I used some of the residual money I got from some of my movie making, threw it into artwork, and I just figured it all out. And I hope that this is an inspiration that people will be able to do this too. I was still working the crappy job when I wrote these scripts. I was still working the crappy job when I figured out how to find an artist, figured out how to piece issue 1 essentially together. We had a good chunk of it finished before we went to Kickstarter, and then it kind of been snowballing since then. the craziest part of the story is that the Kickstarter, and when it was funded, the day it was funded, the final day of the Kickstarter, when it ended, I got a phone call from my 9 to 5 job and was let go that day. Like this, the exact same day as my Kickstarter was funded. So I took it as a sign that this is what I was meant to do. This is where I'm supposed to go with telling my stories, and kind of just been going with it ever since. I was inspired to sit down. The thing that got me to sit down and write the stories was basically the desperation to get out of the depression that I was in from that 9 to 5 job. Not everyone has that motivator. You have to find what works for you. For me now, I have a 2-year-old. I'm working with the comic stuff. I'm essentially a stay-at-home dad doing comic book stuff. And it's hard to sit down and write. Like, the motivator is a little different for me at this point. I need to push myself harder to get to sit down and write these books, mainly because it's exhausting with a 2-year-old, and just trying to maintain this new house that I'm living in Ohio, and trying to do everything on top of trying to create. And I had kind of anticipated this lull in writing when we decided to move across states and move into this house, and we had a kid. And I kind of wrote a lot of scripts beforehand, thinking I can work the production end of things leading up to having more time to write again. And kind of that's where I am at now. So the inspiration, it comes from different places. Now for me, it's the fact that I want to keep my audience and keep my readers satisfied that there's more stories coming. And I have more stories to tell. So I want to get those out into the world. And now I'm more excited about just the aspect of diving into different genres and digging up different ideas from things that I've written over the years. So the first step to me to getting into comic books was finding that inspiration to write and to create. And I hope all of you out there can find that too. If you have this feeling that you need to make something, like I am a miserable person when I'm not creating something, and my wife will attest to that. When I wasn't doing film stuff, I was awful. And then I would go work on film, and it would be hard, and it would drain me, because that wasn't essentially what I wanted to be doing. But I was always more motivated by the end of it. And then, I'd go back to the 9 to 5, and it was like, opening an old wound, essentially. And I just was in this vicious cycle of create, and then there's a lull for a number of years, and I'd create again. I needed something more consistent for my creating, some better outlet for my mind. So I felt like doing comics, I can keep it me and a couple other people. I don't have all the egos. I don't have all the other people to deal with the ins and outs of everything. So it just makes it a lot easier to create. And I've jumped into working on kids' books too, which I find even more liberating, because it can be me and one other person, and they're so simple as far as I've found to put together compared to even a comic book. So I'm going to kind of be dabbling in both of those worlds now, and I hope you guys can go and read that article that I wrote. It's not very long. It's on the Patreon page, the Caleb Toussaint and Village Comics Patreon. And hopefully this is something that I can be doing more often. I'll be doing more steps in my creative process. feel free to leave comments about what you'd like to see, what experiences you'd like me to share with you that I've gone through over the years. I've been doing this for going on 4 years now. So I've seen a lot. I've gone through a lot of heartache and pain to get the process fine-tuned to where I am now. And now I'm doing a lot more conventions. I'm doing signings, and just, that's even going to ramp up even more next year. And it's exciting, but it's overwhelming. And I know coming into this, there's a lot to learn. And that's why I'm doing this, because I want to share my experiences with all of you guys. And all I ask in return is that you come check out my Patreon page. If you want comic book content, you must become a patron. Even $1 gets you access to a lot of the stuff. And then if you bump to $5, you get digital editions of all the Village Comic content and stuff too. So, I mean, I'm trying to make this super affordable, because I know many creators coming in, you don't have a lot of money to spend, and the money you do have to spend, you want to put it into creating stuff. And it's hard to put the money into things like workshops and things like, online seminars or online courses about people talking about this stuff. And I don't really want to, my intention is not to become the guy that teaches how to do all this stuff, but I've been constantly asked questions about this stuff, and I get a lot of direct messages asking me questions. And honestly, like, I wish I had more people sharing a lot of these ins and outs out there for free when I was starting, because I had to kind of just figure a lot of it out too. There's a few people that provide a lot of free content, but there's also a lot of people out there that charge a lot for courses. So, I mean, and the courses are great, and the content is great that people provide that's out there. I just want to provide my perspective, the experiences that I've had. This is not the de facto definitive way of doing any of this stuff. There might be better ways for me to be doing it too, and maybe I can learn from some of you guys in this process too. So I just want to share what I've gone through and where I'm intending to go with all of this, so that you can learn from it, and then maybe I can learn a little bit from you guys too. So that's kind of it for step one. Get inspired, guys. Just write as much as you can. I pounded out those 3 scripts initially, and I picked the one that I thought would connect the most with an audience. And Alter Life came from a very real story. I mean, it's a fictional story, but the character is going through a lot of stuff that I was dealing with at the time. And I feel like that's why it connected with a lot of people when I launched it. So hopefully this will inspire you to kind of go and do a rebirth of your own. I spent almost a decade doing something, not only a 9-to-5 job that I didn't like, but the creative outlet ended up being something that I didn't want to be doing. So it was almost a decade of my life doing something I didn't want to do. And it's amazing to see how much more support there is in comics, and how, just in general, I feel more, I don't know, I feel better about my creations and about my work and about my life in general working on comic books. And something just clicked when I started doing this. And hopefully you find that too. I'll talk to you all again soon. Feel free to leave me questions. Feel free to reach out on the Patreon page or on the Village Comics Facebook page. And hopefully we can start covering more stuff that will teach you, or more aspects of things that can help you along your journey to create books, comics, anything that you're inspired to create.